AAA gaming has changed a lot in the last 2 decades. Once defined by flashy graphics and massive budgets, it now means more than just scale. It's about cultural impact, technical ambition, and the ability to grab millions of players worldwide. These are the games that don't just sell copies. They set the tone for what the industry chases next. Some have been near flawless, others messy but ambitious. Yet all of them left their mark as true benchmarks of the modern era. If you could, please subscribe and ring the bell. Also leave a like if you like the content. When Elden Ring launched in 2022, it felt like the whole gaming world stopped to take notice. FromSoft had already built a reputation with Dark Souls and Bloodborne, but this was something bigger, an open-world RPG that tore up the rulebook on how those games are usually designed. Instead of filling the map with icons, fetch quests, and repetitive objectives, Elden Ring embraced discovery. Every hill, every ruined church, every foggy forest seemed to hold secrets waiting for the curious to stumble upon them. The lands between was massive, but it never felt empty. One minute you're wandering through quiet fields, and the next you're ambushed by a dragon. Hidden dungeons and cryptic NPCs gave the world a sense of mystery, and the way areas subtly connected echoed the interlocking brilliance of the original Dark Souls. George R.R. Martin's involvement may have been more marketing than substance, but the lore still carried that FromSoft mix of melancholy and grandeur. Of course, it was the freedom that made Elden Ring revolutionary. Players weren't funneled into one path. They could tackle challenges in different orders, explore at their own pace, and approach fights however they wanted. Stuck on a boss? Ride off in another direction, level up, and return later. That openness turned frustration into motivation, and it's a big reason why even casual players who bounced off Souls games stuck with this one. Still, it wasn't without flaws. Some criticized the reused bosses, a few dungeons blurred together, and the technical performance, especially on PC, was uneven at launch. Yet even with those blemishes, Elden Ring became a cultural phenomenon and sparks endless discussions about builds, secrets, and lore. More than just another FromSoft title, it redefined what an open world could feel like. Instead of checklist fatigue, it offered pure wonder. It reminded players of what games are supposed to do best. Make us curious, make us explore, and make every discovery feel earned. When Grand Theft Auto 5 dropped in 2013, it was more than a game. It was an event. A sprawling open-world crime epic with 3 playable protagonists, a satirical take on modern America, and a city that felt alive in ways few games ever had. Los Santos wasn't just a backdrop, it was the star. Every street corner, radio station, and random encounter pulsed with Rockstar's trademark detail. The single-player campaign was cinematic and ambitious, with heists that felt like Hollywood blockbusters and character switching that kept the pacing fresh. Trevor's chaos, Michael's midlife crisis, and Franklin's rise from the bottom each grounded the story in a way that made it more than just a crime fantasy. But what really turned GTA 5 into a phenomenon was GTA Online. At first, it launched rocky, glitches, server issues, a grind-heavy progression, but over the years it evolved into one of the most profitable and expansive live service models in gaming. New content updates, heists, role-play servers, even full-blown economies have kept it alive for over a decade. It became more than just a game, it was a platform. Still, that longevity has been a double-edged sword. Many fans feel Rockstar leaned too hard into monetization, leaving the single-player side of things behind. The absence of true single-player DLC, despite how beloved the main story was, left players frustrated. And with GTA 6 looming, some argue that the obsession with GTA Online slowed down Rockstar's creativity elsewhere. Yet despite those criticisms, GTA 5 remains a landmark. It has sold over 200 million copies, making it one of the best-selling games of all time, and it continues to shape what open-world design look like. Love it or hate it, no discussion of modern AAA benchmarks is complete without it.
I'm gonna go find out.
When Insomniac's Marvel's Spider-Man launched in 2018, it wasn't the first superhero game to try and capture the fantasy of being a costumed hero, but it was the one that nailed it. The simple act of swinging across Manhattan was so fluid and joyful that players could spend hours ignoring missions just to zip from rooftop to rooftop. That kinetic sense of movement became the game's core appeal, but what made it more than a gimmick was the way it wrapped that freedom around a heartfelt story about Peter Parker balancing heroics with his personal life. The sequel and its spin-off, Miles Morales, built on that foundation. Combat took cues from the Arkham series, but added a faster, flashier rhythm, with gadgets and acrobatics keeping every fight dynamic. Miles brought his own style, both mechanically with his Venom powers and narratively as a younger, more grounded Spider-Man. These games leaned into spectacle, but they never lost sight of the human characters at the center, a balance that made them resonate beyond just comic book fans. Still, the series isn't perfect. Some critics point out that outside of swinging and story, the open world design plays it safe. Side quests often fall into familiar patterns, chasing criminals, dismantling bases, or collecting tokens. While these tasks serve their purpose, they lack the imagination seen in other open-world giants. Yet the strength of traversal and storytelling often made up for the formulaic structure, with Spider-Man 2 pushing the series further, introducing both Peter and Miles as playable characters, alongside new villains and set pieces. The franchise has cemented itself as one of Sony's flagship AAA experiences. It may not revolutionize open-world design the way Breath of the Wild did, but it captures the fantasy of being a superhero better than any game before it. For fans and newcomers alike, Insomniac proved that sometimes joy and polish are enough to define a modern benchmark. When God of War was rebooted in 2018, it surprised everyone. Kratos, once defined by pure rage, became a more layered character, a father navigating guilt, violence, and his relationship with Atreus. That reinvention worked so well that expectations for the sequel, Ragnarok, were almost unfairly high. Released in 2022, it largely delivered. A sprawling Norse epic with incredible production values, emotional storytelling, and combat that somehow managed to be both brutal and elegant. The game's biggest strength was how it expanded without losing focus. The relationship between Kratos and his son grew naturally, with Atreus no longer just the boy following his father's lead, but stepping into his own role. Their dynamic carried much of the emotional weight, especially as the story leaned into themes of fate, choice, and the inevitability of endings. The performances were nothing short of phenomenal. Gameplay was refined rather than reinvented. Combat kept its weighty feel, but added more weapons and abilities, making encounters feel fresh. The realms themselves were more varied, filled with puzzles, side stories, and visually stunning environments. It was a game designed to overwhelm players with quality content, and for the most part, it succeeded. That said, not everyone was thrilled. Some felt it played things a little too safe, sticking close to the 2018 formula rather than taking bigger risks. The pacing, especially in the middle stretch, dragged for certain players. And while the narrative reached emotional highs, it occasionally leaned on exposition-heavy dialogue that slowed momentum. Even with those critiques, Ragnarok cemented itself as one of the defining AAA games of its generation. It proved that sequels don't have to reinvent the wheel to be impactful. Sometimes, it's enough to refine and expand what already works. It may not have had the shock factor of the reboot, but it delivered a worthy conclusion to Kratos' Norse saga.
Could give it some thought.
Few games in recent memory have had a launch as infamous as Cyberpunk 2077. In December 2020, hype was at a fever pitch. Trailers promised a futuristic playground. Keanu Reeves was part of the cast, and CD Projekt Red had sky-high trust thanks to The Witcher 3. But when players finally stepped in Night City, the dream quickly fell apart. Bugs, crashes, and performance issues made the game borderline unplayable. Sony even pulled it from the PlayStation Store, a humiliation that almost no major AAA release had faced before. Yet beneath the broken systems was something compelling. Night City was a visual marvel. Neon-drenched streets, bustling crowds, and skyscrapers that seemed to scrape infinity. Its narrative foundation was strong too, weaving together themes of corporate greed, human augmentation, and identity. V's partnership with Johnny Silverhand, half ally, half ghost in a machine, wasn't just flashy star power. It was the emotional core of the story. Over the years, CD Projekt Red did what many thought impossible. They turned things around. Patch after patch improved stability. And with the release of the Edgerunners anime on Netflix in 2022, interest in the game spiked again. Suddenly, players were rediscovering what worked. The branching storylines, the strong side quests, and moments of genuine atmosphere. By the time the Phantom Liberty expansion dropped in 2023, Cyberpunk 2077 had gone from industry cautionary tale to redemption arc. Still, even in its fixed state, criticisms remain. Police AI feels shallow. Some systems never reach their full potential, and compared to the most dynamic open worlds, Night City can feel static once the missions are done. But for all its missteps, Cyberpunk 2077 represents a unique kind of benchmark. Not a flawless triumph, but a reminder that even the biggest failures can be salvaged with enough commitment. It's a case study in ambition, hubris, and perseverance, all rolled into one neon package. When Zelda Breath of the Wild launched alongside the Nintendo Switch in 2017, it didn't just revitalize the Zelda franchise, it reshaped the entire open-world genre. Gone were the rigid dungeons and hand-holding quest markers of earlier entries. Instead, players were dropped into Hyrule with little more than a vague goal: defeat Calamity Ganon. Everything in between was left up to the player. That sense of freedom, of carving your own path through a vast and reactive world, became the game's defining feature. What made Breath of the Wild truly special was how its systems encouraged experimentation. Fire spread naturally through grass. Metal weapons conducted electricity, and a gust of wind could change how you approach combat. Shrines replaced traditional dungeons, offering bite-sized puzzles that let you use your abilities in creative ways. Climbing nearly any surface and gliding across wide landscapes gave exploration a sense of wonder, making even mundane treks feel like mini adventures. But for all its acclaim, the game wasn't immune to criticism. Weapon durability was divisive, with some players appreciating how it encouraged variety, while others found it frustrating when their favorite gear broke mid-battle. The story felt thin compared to previous Zelda entries, more atmosphere than narrative depth. And while the shrines were clever, the lack of large-scale, traditional dungeons left some long-time fans wanting more. Even with those critiques, Breath of the Wild became one of the most important releases of the last decade. It showed that open worlds didn't have to drown players in endless icons and side quests. Instead, they could foster curiosity and playfulness. Its influence is easy to see. Developers across the industry are still chasing that mix of freedom and discovery. Breath of the Wild wasn't just another Zelda game. It was a bold statement about what AAA design could aspire to, and it left a blueprint future games continue to follow.
Everything you need.
Few franchises embody the idea of cinematic gaming quite like The Last of Us. When the first game launched in 2013, it immediately stood out for its emotional storytelling. Joel and Ellie's journey through a post-apocalyptic America wasn't just another zombie survival tale. It was intimate, brutal, and filled with moral gray areas. Naughty Dog leaned heavily on performance capture and nuanced writing, creating characters who felt as real as anything on television. It blurred the line between gaming and prestige drama, setting a new bar for narrative in AAA games. The sequel doubled down on that ambition and divided players in the process. With its brutal violence, unexpected character choices, and a willingness to make players sit with discomfort, it sparked fierce debate. Some hailed it as a masterpiece of bold storytelling, while others felt alienated by its narrative decisions and pacing. Regardless of where you land, it's hard to deny the cultural impact. It dominated discussions across gaming spaces and beyond. Mechanically, the series sits somewhere between stealth action and survival horror. The weighty combat, limited resources, and grounded animations give encounters a gritty, desperate feel. At the same time, the linear level design keeps players moving through a carefully curated experience. This design philosophy means the series doesn't offer the player freedom on the scale of other titles, but makes up for it with intensity and polish. Of course, the cinematic approach comes with its drawbacks. Some critics argue the games lean too heavily on cutscenes, leaving stretches where player agency feels minimal. Others point to the bleak tone, which can be exhausting. But even with those critiques, The Last of Us stands as one of gaming's most influential franchises. So much so that it jumped to HBO as a critically acclaimed television adaptation. That crossover success cemented its status not just as a game series, but as a cultural phenomenon. If Grand Theft Auto V was Rockstar at its most bombastic, Red Dead Redemption 2 was the studio at its most patient and ambitious. Released in 2018, it was a technical showcase and a storytelling masterclass, pushing immersion to heights rarely seen in gaming. Every detail, from the way mud stuck to Arthur's boots, to the way horse balls reacted to the cold, was part of Rockstar's obsessive commitment to realism. At its heart was Arthur Morgan, one of the most layered protagonists ever put to screen. His journey from loyal outlaw to weary, soul-searching man gave weight to every decision, every conversation, every campfire. The Van der Linde gang wasn't just background dressing. They were a family, fracturing in slow motion, and the player was right in the middle of it. Few games have made loss and inevitability feel so personal. Technically, it was jaw-dropping. The vast landscapes, dynamic weather, and natural AI behaviors created a world that felt alive even when you weren't moving the story forward. From fishing trips to quiet hunts in the wilderness, RDR2 invited players to slow down and live in its world. That was both its biggest strength and its most divisive quality. For some, the slower pacing was brilliant, offering depth and immersion rarely matched. For others, it felt tedious. The deliberate animations for looting, skinning, and interacting added realism, but also tested patience. Rockstar built a game that asked players to play by its rules, and not everyone had the time or willingness to commit. Still, the impact is undeniable. RDR2 became one of the highest-rated games of all time, earning praise for its narrative and production values. It proved that a big-budget game didn't need to sacrifice artistry for mass appeal. Even with debates about its pacing, it remains a high benchmark for storytelling and gaming, and a reminder that AAA can still aim for something deeper than spectacle. When CD Projekt Red released The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt in 2015, it didn't just raise the bar for RPGs, it reset it entirely. In an era where open worlds often meant big spaces filled with empty quests, this game proved that size could go hand in hand with substance. Its sprawling landscapes, from the war-torn swamps of Elden to the fairy tale beauty of Toussaint, weren't just pretty to look at. They were bursting with stories, choices, and consequences. What truly set it apart was the writing. Side quests weren't throwaway distractions. They were fully realized narratives. The Bloody Baron arc, for example, remains one of the most discussed side stories in gaming, blending personal tragedy with moral complexity. That level of care made the world feel alive in ways even mainline quests in other games could match. At the center of it all was Geralt of Rivia, a grizzled monster hunter navigating war, politics, and family. His dry wit and stoicism were balanced by deeply human moments, especially in his relationships with Ciri, Yennefer, and Triss. The game asked players to make choices that rarely had clear good or bad outcomes, and the results often lingered long after the controller was set down. Of course, it wasn't flawless. At launch, the game was plagued with bugs, performance issues, and clunky horse controls that sparked plenty of memes. Its combat system, while serviceable, never quite matched the depth of its writing. Some players even felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale, calling it bloated. But despite those criticisms, The Witcher 3 became the benchmark for RPGs, winning Game of the Year and selling over 60 million copies. Even today, nearly a decade later, developers still chase its blend of narrative weight and open-world freedom. It wasn't just a great game. It was proof that AAA storytelling could be ambitious without losing its soul. In an era where many AAA games advertise player choice but ultimately funnel you into the same handful of outcomes, Baldur's Gate 3 stands tall above. Larian Studios didn't just revive a dormant franchise. they redefined what narrative depth in a modern RPG could look like. Released in 2023, it embraced the spirit of tabletop Dungeons and Dragons, offering near limitless freedom in how you approach situations. Every conversation, every encounter, every roll of the dice feels like it can take the story in a completely new direction. What makes it remarkable is how reactive the game really is. Characters remember your decisions. The world shifts based on who you ally with or betray, and entire storylines can be locked away or unlocked, depending on choices you make. Unlike many RPGs where choice is mostly cosmetic, this game leans fully into consequence. It makes every playthrough feel personal, and that's why players often find themselves diving back in for a second or even third run. Of course, all this ambition comes with trade-offs. The game can be overwhelming, especially for newcomers not used to CRPGs or dice roll mechanics. Combat, while tactical and rewarding, has a slower pace compared to action-heavy RPGs like The Witcher 3 or Elden Ring. And bugs, while not game-breaking for most, still reminded players that such a vast and reactive system is difficult to keep perfectly polished. But those critiques don't overshadow what Larian achieved. Baldur's Gate 3 stands as a benchmark not just because it tells a good story, but because it trusts players to shape that story in ways few modern AAA titles dare. It captures the spirit of sitting around a tabletop with friends, improvising and reacting, but wraps it in cinematic production values and voice acting that rival the best in the industry. For many, it isn't just one of the best RPGs in years. It's proof that the genre, when given the resources and care, can compete with any blockbuster.
This place is fun.